it's Bunny and welcome to today's video and welcome to another WWE reaction. This video was recommended by Bizarro. Thank you so much for sharing the subscription badge. I love you for that. Wait, I need to make the love sign the way people do it now. Yay! Okay, Bizarro said you should check out Jake the Snake, the Jake Roberts story full career documentary on the same channel that you watched this one. I also think you would really get a kick out of Luca Underground, so anything pertaining to that could be a good time. Oh, he was actually commenting on Who's Next, the Goldberg full documentary, and I'm looking forward to react to more full documentaries by wrestlers because that's the best way for me to catch up with the history of these legends and people who are mentioned a lot of time even today. So yeah, let's check out Jake the Snake one. And I remember mentioning at one time there was like this clip with a guy with a snake bringing a snake to the arena. I was like, oh my god, is it poisonous? Oh my god, there is an actual snake. And imagine being there live, first raw, and seeing that. Actual snake, you guys. What? That's awesome. Let's go and check the video.
There have been a lot of great personalities in wrestling. However, perhaps no one in the history of the industry has been able to perform with such an excellent grasp of psychology more than Jake the Snake Roberts.
All right.
Yes, whether it be his masterful ability to hold
Jake
crowds
Roberts,
in the palm
but he's
of
not
his
called
hand
Jake
with
the
his
Snake
in-ring
Roberts.
work, or his often chilling promos that
He's
proved
green.
you
He's
didn't have to shout
Shrek.
to be heard. Few, if any, have ever built a more compelling character than him. But of course, with this delving into his own
that's him
psyche
now.
came a whole host of personal demons being unleashed too. But how did it all happen? Well, join us today as we take a deep dive into his entire career journey in Jake the Snake, the Jake Roberts story.
Okay.
Aurelian Smith was born in Gainesville, Texas on May 20th, 1950 into a local wrestling family that was led by his father, Grizzly Smith. During the youngster's childhood, however, Aurelian would, along with his siblings Robin and Michael, have to suffer the brunt of his parents' wrath on many occasions, the full details of which are far too disturbing to go into here, but suffice to say, allegedly
to be honest,
involved much abuse.
Oh my god, the abuse. That's so sad. But also, keep in mind it was 1950. That was like literally just years after World War II. And you never know what his parents had to go through. And emotionally, like the PTSD and everything after that, it would be really terrible. I don't mean to say like that excludes or whatever his parents has done to him. But at the same time, I feel sorry for everyone participating in that situation.
And of course, this would all have a huge impact on the developing
If that
kids'
is the
minds,
case, at least.
something which led to Aurelian notoriously struggling with many substance abuse problems later in life.
That's so sad.
That said, there was one escape that he and Robin had, a surprising one given their father's profession, and that was the world of professional wrestling.
His father was a wrestler
even with the association
too.
it had with their dark home life, the colorful world of good guys beating up bad guys still gave the two siblings some sense of comfort. And this story of watching wrestling together would eventually develop into a desire to try it out themselves, with the brother going first, as in 1974, he would begin his training in the Louisiana area, from there picking up some booking at the likes of Mid-South Wrestling, Mid-Atlantic Wrestling, and Georgia Championship Wrestling. And it was during those early days that Aurelian would develop the gimmick he would end up keeping his entire career thereafter.
Which one?
That
The
being
snake?
Jake the Snake Roberts, a cold and untrustworthy villain who, rather than deliver coked-out interviews and use his oversized muscles like so many other performers of the day, would instead speak softly, cutting promos in an almost literary style as he forced viewers to lean in close so as to hear him clearly.
Oh my god, I never heard
He
that.
would then hit the ring and take on his already psyched out opponents in a
Imagine
calculated
LA Knight
manner
or The
that
Mist
put
trying to
brains
speak softly.
ahead of brawn. And of course, this character, something quite unlike anyone else was doing during that era, quickly became a hit, and so it didn't take long before Roberts was traveling even further around the territory circuit, from there making appearances for the likes of Stampede Wrestling in Canada and World Class Championship Wrestling in Texas, with him even winning both television and six-man gold in the latter. His real big break, however, wouldn't come until March of 1986, when, as part of his national expansion, Vince McMahon offered the up-and-comer a contract with WWE. And so now, getting the opportunity to appear on a bigger stage than he could ever have dreamt of, Jake would make his debut at April 7th's WrestleMania 2, there defeating George Wells, and afterwards draping his fully grown python Damien over the top of him in a spot that would soon become a regular occurrence.
I would not like to fight
After
against
that, he
this
entered
guy.
into a feud with Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and something which was considered an unheard of line of violence to cross back in those days.
Oh.
Yes, the DDT,
He's
a
a
move
meanie.
which has since become a staple of modern wrestling,
Yeah, oh
had been
my
invented
God.
by Jake himself sometime
No
prior to
way.
this, with him, as the story
Wait,
goes, one
oh
night
my
grabbing an
God,
opponent in a
that's
headlock
cool.
at a live show some years before, only for him to then trip and fall back, driving his opponent's head into the mat to a monster
That's
crowd
actually
reaction.
a really cool move.
And recognizing this reaction, Jake would quickly develop a way to do the move safely, as it soon became his signature attack, something which got
Nice.
so over with fans that, at times, it threatened to turn him babyface, as you could hear the entire crowd call out for it whenever they knew it was coming. But of course, for as good a wrestler as the Texas
Ooh.
native was in the ring, WWE were quick to realize that he was equally as good, if not better, on the mic. And so it wouldn't be long after this that he'd be
Oh.
given his own talk show segment on WWE TV named The
skinny
Snake
here.
Pit, with this seeing him interview a number of wrestlers over the years, putting his promo skills to excellent use
Oh
as he
my
helped
God,
to
that's
build
so
up a multitude
cool.
of programs, whether they directly
When you're
involved him or
talented
not.
in more than one thing.
And it was on an episode of The Snake Pit later that year that Roberts would even get to interview Hulk Hogan, with this all ending in the Snake laying out the Hulkster with a DDT, a move that was supposed to get boos and help to build up sympathy for the babyface ahead of a planned feud between the two. By then, though, fans had taken to the dastardly heel so much that they instead cheered for him after he took out Hogan that night. And as a result of this, fearing he was going to be overshadowed during the
Oh my
match
God,
itself,
Hulk.
the champ would backtrack and convince Vince McMahon to scrap the whole thing, as Jake instead started a beef with the Honky Tonk Man, where he could there formally switch to the
So
side of the good
mean.
guys.
Like,
without
oh, someone is gonna take my attention away from me. Oh, boo! I want the whole attention only on me. That's Hulk Hogan.
stealing Hulk's thunder. This leading to the new fan
Not in the
favorite
head.
starting to taking painkillers so as to deal with the subsequent injury, something which would soon
Shit.
spiral into full-blown addiction.
Ah, see.
But he would also get to share the spotlight with Alice Cooper following the pinfall, this giving him some additional mainstream exposure. And after this, so popular was he becoming, he was even slated to win the Intercontinental title before the year's end. Unfortunately, however, the neck injury caused by that guitar shot still lingered on,
Oh,
and
no
so,
way.
unsure if he was going to have to take time off, McMahon scrapped this instead, and instead moved the Texas boy into a feud with ravishing Rick Rude, one which would see Rude draw major heat by involving Robert's real-life wife Cheryl into the proceedings.
Did I just see that thing or what was that? Oh my god!
But while this was all part of
What?
the show,
How did they
it
allow
wasn't to say that
that?
there weren't problems going on at home for the two lovers anyway, as by then, Jake's drug addiction was beginning to spiral out of control, with him now adding other substances such as cocaine and alcohol to the mix as he tried his best
So
to deal
many
with
of
both
these
the pain he was
wrestlers,
in,
it's
as well as the
Such
traumas
a
of his
tough
childhood.
thing, man.
Back in the ring, though, he was able to weave all of this into his character work as, with his masterful grasp of psychology, he continued to be a standout of pretty much every show he was booked on, often having the crowd in the palm of his hand as they went along with every subtle movement he made and every quiet word he spoke. Come March of 1989, in fact, Jake would have gotten into a feud with the legendary Andre the Giant, with this once centering around the Frenchman's purported fear of snakes, something which the Texas
Oh.
boy would use to his advantage throughout.
Yeah, he will.
And after
Yeah.
that, he would move on to fighting over the $1 Million Championship with Ted DiBiase for a while, with all this culminating in a showdown at WrestleMania. It wouldn't be until the following year at WrestleMania 7, however, that Robert's mastery of psychology would be put to its greatest test, with this being where he would have a now famous blindfold match against Rick the Model Martel. And while this match could and should have by all rights been a stinker, the babyface was instead able to turn it into a highlight of the show, as he got the live audience heavily involved throughout, instructing them to cheer whenever he was pointing in the correct direction of his unseen opponent so as to help him hit the DDT. After that, though, kayfabe hard times would come down upon him when Jake's python Damien was apparently crushed to death by earthquake on the April 27, 1991 episode of Superstars of Wrestling. And while the fan favorite would get his revenge after introducing a new snake named Lucifer, he would end up turning heel soon after this, when he aligned himself with The Undertaker as the two set their sights on the Ultimate Warrior, with Roberts at that point explaining his actions by telling everyone that you should never trust a snake. And when the Warrior was fired from WWE that summer, what followed after that was a memorable segment on the October 21st, 1991 episode of Superstars of Wrestling, where Jake would tie up Savage in the ring ropes, and then from there unleash his cobra on him. Of course, the snake had been de-venomed ahead of the stunt, but it hadn't been defanged. And so, when it bit into Randy's arm that night, it quickly became clear to both men in the ring that it didn't want to let go. Following this then, Roberts would spend what felt like an eternity trying to pull the snake off his rival as blood poured from the wound it had left behind, and pretty much every kid in the audience was left in tears. All of this, however, made for a highly effective segment. And so, when the two had their eventual match at December 3rd's Tuesday in Texas pay-per-view, everyone in attendance was desperate to see the babyface hero get his revenge. And while he did beat Jake that night, it would be the snake who got the last laugh after he ended up slapping Miss Elizabeth following the bout, with this drawing nuclear heat as, from there, the two continued their rivalry into the new year, eventually settling things once and for all at January 27th, 1992's Saturday night's main event, where Randy would put his opponent down for good. Following this, and Roberts would segue into a program with The Undertaker as the two former allies slowly built up to a match together at WrestleMania 8 in the weeks and months that followed. By the time that night would come, though, the Texas native had become thoroughly disenfranchised with the company, with this happening after he'd allegedly lobbied successfully to get a job on WWE's creative team, with Vince here apparently assuring him that he had the job, only for the boss to then later rescind this offer after Pat Patterson returned to the company following the aftermath of the Ring Boy scandal. Feeling disrespected then, Roberts would demand his release from his contract. In the years since, though, Jake has expressed regret over this decision, with him arguing that his state of mind had become so messed up at that point due to the cocktail of drugs and alcohol he was taking, he wasn't able to think clearly anymore. And of course, by then, this drug use had graduated to far more hardcore substances, such as crack cocaine, something which Jake had taken to smoking during his latter days in the WWE, and would continue to do for the foreseeable future. Of course, for most men then, this would have been time to get a wake-up call and check into rehab, but not for the snake. No, he just moved over to World Championship Wrestling instead, where he would work alongside his estranged father, Grizzly Smith, for a time, with this powder keg of a situation only managing to strengthen his demons as his substance abuse issues got all the much worse. And as if that wasn't bad enough, by the time he'd signed a formal contract with the company later that year, his proposed salary of $3.5 million was slashed to just $200,000. This coming after new management had entered the company in the form of Bill Watts, someone who Roberts had legitimate heat with from back in his Mid-South days. But having already burned his bridges with Vince McMahon by then, the Texan was forced to take the offer anyway, as he from there established himself as a heel after allying with Cactus Jack and the Barbarian. And as a top heel, he would spend his initial months on the roster feuding with Sting, a feud that would ultimately culminate in a pretty awful coal miner's glove match at October 25th, 1992's Halloween Havoc. Disappointed with this too then, Jake would leave the company soon thereafter, with him from there spending the next couple of years making a living by booking various indie dates as he showed up at the likes of Smoky Mountain Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, and Mexico's AAA. Of course, those years in the wilderness would also see the Texan reassess his life after he'd found God, with him from there becoming a born-again Christian as he tried his best to abstain from drugs and alcohol going forward.
Whatever helps
and news of his progress would eventually reach the hallways of WWE as it happened, with this being enough to get him a foot in the door once more in 1996, as he was brought back in as a babyface playing a similarly redeemed character who would preach the ways of the Bible while also bringing his new snake, Revelations, along for the ride. And perhaps the peak of this run came during that year's King of the Ring tournament, when the company began pushing the redemption story of Jake winning the whole thing as a way for him to finally quench his demons once and for all.
That's
Of course, any wrestling fan from the time, however, will know that this was the year Stone Cold Steve Austin would meet him in the finals on June 23rd, with the Rattlesnake beating the fan favorite that night, and then turning his born-again gimmick back on him as he went up the entrance ramp afterwards to cut his now iconic Austin 316 promo.
Okay,
Even in loss,
that's
though,
why we have
Jake
the
had managed to prove to fans that something had changed within him, And from there, things appeared to be continuing in the right direction even more, as the Texan moved over to a feud with Jerry the King Lawler.
Ooh.
Behind the scenes, however, his substance abuse issues would begin to resurface before long, with this relapse allegedly being brought on by his difficulty dealing with the fact that WWE, seeing his physical abilities were winding down, had wanted him to move away from the ring into a more permanent backstage role. And
Just
sadly,
admit
these issues
your
would only
best
get
days are
worse from
behind
there,
you. Why
with
is it
this
so hard
ultimately
for
leading to
people
the
to
company
do
ending up
that?
releasing him from his contract once more in February of 1997. So now, with both WCW and WCW's doors closed, Jake would spend the next couple of years making on and off appearances in Paul Heyman's Extreme Championship Wrestling, most notably teaming with Tommy Dreamer at 1998's November to Remember pay-per-view to take on Just Incredible and Jack Victory. For a man with as many vices as he had by then, however, perhaps in hindsight, the ECW locker room wasn't the best environment for Roberts to be placed in at that point. In fact, his drug issues would get so bad at this point that he would find himself becoming a primary character in the 1999 documentary Beyond the Mat, a documentary which would shine a light on his rapidly collapsing personal life, as many fans got to see for the first time the full extent of just how far he'd fallen. Sadly, though, this was far from rock bottom for him, as, from there, he would only spiral further, with him next making an appearance at the now infamous Heroes of Wrestling show in October of that year and embarrassing himself even further when he showed up to the arena highly intoxicated. From there, cutting a slurring, incomprehensible promo before going out to the ring, clearly in no condition to perform, all while his opponents tried their best to have a tag match around him. So bad was he, in fact, that this match that night wasn't even supposed to be a tag one. It was supposed to be a singles bout. After seeing just how bad he was, though, the promoters quickly realized that they couldn't have him out there alone, and so were left with little other choice than to call an audible after he was already in the ring, with the other performers involved doing their best from there to get him out of the ring as much as possible. And following this incident, American bookings would largely dry up for the former WWE superstar, as he would instead have to resort to taking small indie bookings in the UK, where he would wrestle for the likes of All-Star Wrestling and the World Association of Wrestling, allegedly under the conditions that the promoters would have an 8-ball of cocaine ready for him backstage whenever he arrived. Of course, he would periodically try to clean himself up again during these years, but this never managed to stick for long, as the traumas of his youth would always be right there waiting to send him spiraling once again, something which continued even after WWE had tried to help him in 2007 as part of the blanket offer they had put out to offer rehab to any prior employees. Ultimately, it wouldn't be until Diamond Dallas Page came back into his life in October 2012 that Jake would truly turn a corner, as, from there, the former WCW champion would take Roberts into his Atlanta home and put him through a rigorous recovery program that involved therapy, long put-off surgery, and a strict regimen of DDP yoga. And what a miracle that turned out to be then, because finally, after decades of circling the drain of death, Jake was able to get his demons under control, as he was now able to abstain from drink and drugs entirely, something which, bar a few small relapses here and there in the years that have followed, he has managed to maintain to this day. Less than a year after he began this process, in fact, and he was already looking like a new man, with him even able to make a cameo return to the ring again at an indie show for First State Championship Wrestling. Of course, Jake was never going to be making a full-time return to a wrestling role at this point, but what this was representative of was how far he'd come and how much he'd been able to rebuild his life out of the rubble. And if you really want to see this transformation in full, you can actually watch the whole thing as it was filmed for the documentary The Resurrection of Jake the Snake, with this currently being available on a variety of streaming services worldwide.
I feel like I want to watch that.
Despite being able to return to the ring at an indie show and get his health back in check again, the Texan still felt like there was one more thing he had to achieve so as to solidify his transformation, and that was get back in with WWE, with him at that point publicly stating his desire to be an entrant in the 2014 Royal Rumble. Of course, with his past history and the company unsure if he would relapse again, Vince McMahon was hesitant to put him in the ring. What he did do, however, was arguably even better than that, as, after making a cameo appearance at the January 6, 2014 episode of Raw, the announcement would be made that Roberts would be getting inducted into that year's WWE Hall of Fame class, with this induction coming a few months later at April 5th, the night before WrestleMania 30. And on that night, his guardian angel DDP would even introduce him to the audience of both his fans and peers. He from there delivered his speech to a huge standing ovation at the end, this finally completing his redemption in his mind. And since then, life has continued to be good for Jake. He survived a brief cancer scare in 2014, then went on a spoken word tour in 2016. And since 2019, he's become a full-time member of the All Elite Wrestling roster as the manager of Lance Archer, with his peerless verbal skills being put to excellent use here as he's helped to make the river.
That's what I was thinking. Like, if you cannot perform anymore as a wrestler, like physically, and you were really good in promos, you should be still active in the business as long as you can speak, you know? And either like be someone who is a commentator or someone who introduces or just riles up the crowd, you know?
Talk monster into one of the most feared competitors on the roster.
Anything.
And all this has had the knock-on effect of introducing a whole new generation to what he can do. As now, with the internet making it much easier to rediscover old wrestling footage, younger fans have been able to go back and see just what made him so great in the first place.
Yeah.
And that style that he mastered back in the 80s has aged like a fine wine as it turned out, because while the cocaine-fueled promo style of Macho Man Randy Savage and the in-ring theatrics of Hulk Hogan might look overly cartoonish to younger fans today, Jake's quiet, menacing behavior remains chilling even now, with his mastery of psychology proving to be evergreen as, just as people knew then, they know now all the same that if you don't want to find yourself in trouble, either wallowing in the muck of avarice or taking a short fall and a bad landing to the ring below, you should never trust a snake. Well guys, what did you think of the video? Let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to smash the like button, subscribe to the channel, as well as follow Wrestle with Andy on Instagram.
I love how he made the video, like basically giving us all the facts and everything, but not really giving us his personal opinion or anything like that. And even if he did, was always so positive and so nice and very informative video. I'm giving it a like for sure, you guys. The Resurrection of Jake the Snake was one of the most emotional documentaries I have ever seen. I am happy Jake was finally able to defeat his demons and find happiness. It is sad that it came at a cost and so late during his career. It makes me really sad that we didn't see his highest potential without the abuse of drugs. And I'm sure that is one of the reasons whenever he looked back at his past, his demons haunted him and he kept relapsing over and over again, which is such a common thing, you know? Like, I feel like people who are relapsed, they should just somehow forget the past and move on and start a new slate without ever looking back and reflecting back, because whenever they do that, like whenever this past haunts them, they always find a reason to relapse. But other than that, the fact that he's today clean and found a way to get back into what he loves to do is always nice to see, which gives me the idea or the conclusion that it's never too late to fix your shiz. Never. You know when it is late? When you're dead. Literally when you're dead. Nothing before that. You can always fix your shiz and you can always find the glory. Doesn't matter what age, doesn't matter what time, there is always something to be doing and there is always something that you can get satisfaction in. If you put the hard work and the attention into doing it, you will find a path that will make you happy, as long as you keep trying and you don't give up on yourself. But that is it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks so much for watching. Make sure to like the video to support this channel and subscribe if you haven't yet to get notified whenever I upload a new video. Also check out my Patreon, patreon.com/supportbunny for more WWE content. And yeah, have a wonderful day and see you tomorrow with a brand new video. Bye!